Ladies and gentlemen, let me welcome you at today's second press conference, which is connected to the movies in the main competition. This is a movie called Lowdown. It was premiered in Sundance Film Festival this January. We will see today's international premiere, international opening night. Right next to me is sitting Jeff Price, for whom this movie is his first feature debut. Then we have the editor of the movie joining us, Nicola Saya, if I am actually pronouncing the name correctly. Michael. Michael Saya, sorry. And so I am pronouncing correctly, sorry, Michael. And a very important part of this movie is obviously music being set up in the 70s, jazz music scene in New York. So we welcome Ohad Talmor, the composer of the movie. Thank you very much for joining us. And if everything is all right now, we can start with the questions. Mirka Spáčilová a then Jana.
Spáčilová dnes, dobrý den. Já bych chtěla poděkovat za ranní film a hlavně za tu velmi podmaňovou náladu 70. Slýchla především díky muzice. A směřuje i moje otázka, jestli můžete říct něco víc o hudební stránce filmu, o výběru, o přípravě, právě aby ta nálada se tam otiskla. Což je asi na oba, na pana skladatele i pana režiséra. Děkuji.
Right. Thank you for the question, and thanks everyone for coming. I'm not entirely used to this situation, but I am enjoying it. I came to the film really as someone that loves jazz a lot, and in fact, almost obsessively fascinated by it, and I've always used it as a model for filmmaking. And actually, my filmmaking background is from the experimental film world. So I spent many years doing films that takes improvisation and composition very literally as being what is the forefront of the experience of watching the film. So this being my first narrative feature film, I thought how important it would be for me to succeed in both telling a story and composing the film in a musical way. And I tried to do that. We all the filmmakers tried to see that through from beginning to end in the big picture, in the entirety of the film, and in each individual scene and each individual shot. And the film comes from a personal meeting that I had when I met the subject of the film, Amy Jo Albany, and I met her about 10 years ago. And I had this kind of intuition meeting her that there was a story, that she had a story to tell. She was someone that was kind of oozing narrative in a mysterious way, really. And I tried to find out about her, and she was very kind of resistant, a little unapproachable. Maybe the film explains a little bit of why she might feel that way. And then it turned out that I was a big fan of her dad's music. And she told me that on only one prior occasion in her life did a non-musician recognize her dad's name. And she kind of softened, and she started telling me these stories of growing up in Hollywood in the 70s. And the stories, and I'm not exaggerating to say it reminded me of the Arabian Nights. Like I would keep returning for another story of this child coming of age. And this slowly became her memoir. And the memoir then became the screenplay, which we shot. But to because it was of the 70s and about music and about memory, about her memory, not just history or biography, we thought it had to be kind of both historically true, but also have memories, dreamlike quality, and to let these two things be interwoven. And then we started working with these two filmmakers over here that are beside me, and Michael Saya, the editor of the film, is a jazz musician as well. And so it was even in the DNA of the way the scenes are cut. And Ohad became interested in Amy's writing right when she started writing this memoir, shortly after Amy and I met. And I think he started listening to Joe Albany solos very, very early on, imagining that sooner or later we were going to have an actor playing Joe Albany who would need to learn these solos, because we had made a decision that whenever Joe Albany is playing the piano in the movie, what the audience is hearing is a true historical recording of Joe Albany. So the actor was going to have to also be able to really play those parts perfectly, that there had to be no question that, in this case, John Hawkes was embodying the energy that is producing this particular act of sort of virtuoso jazz piano playing. So, so all the music in the film kind of comes out of what we saw as Joe Albany's musical inner life. And he was a musician who came of age in the 40s, and he was one of the original inventors of bebop. And he knew the American Songbook, and he knew the new modern music. And because the movie kind of takes the form of a jazz ballad, we knew one of his favorite jazz ballads was Lotus Blossom by Billy Strayhorn, which becomes sort of a theme in the film. So all of these things sort of have come together, and maybe Ohad and Michael want to say something, but I know that Ohad, if I don't know who's yet to see the film and who's seen it, but Ohad's working with John really produced something special, I think.
Jano, chtěla jsi se zeptat?
Tak ještě dáme slovo panu skladateli, asi. Já počkám.
We were just saying that maybe a composer would like to add a few words.
Sure.
On the approach of the music.
Well, Jeff said it right, eloquently so, describing the process, and my contribution was intimately linked to his vision of the movie. As he pointed out, he really is, I would say he and Michael are more than just mere jazz fans. They're people who have a very deep connection to this music. And jazz being this weird, multiform, hard to describe, hard to define art form that is linked to, in a strange way, to each musician playing it, their understanding and their own personal experience of the music really was for me the stepping stone onto which I could start contributing on my own to the movie. So the first step was really for me to understand and to acknowledge and take into account their, and most specifically Jeff's, understanding of the vision, which is of the music and of Joe Albany's world and universe and jazz as a whole. So having been around Jeff for a little while and having had the privilege of sharing and talking many hours and listening to music together, and he's came to my world as well as a musician, I felt this connection and tried to serve his idea of the music. Being a musician myself, having experienced, actually heard of Joe Albany growing up before meeting Jeff. So it was for me a reality. This is somebody that is a historical figure, as Jeff pointed out, and that had an impact on my own coming up as a musician. So the whole thing, as far as writing, was try to merge these two universes, my own perception and Jeff's very detailed and fully felt experience of the music. And then there is the whole side of trying, as Jeff pointed, try to engage the actors into the act of becoming themselves musicians and having reflexes and way of thinking and way of playing that are natural of what we do, which is very hard to explain. It's not easy to translate, and it oftentimes, with most of the movie slash jazz literature that exists out there, it's very awkward for us musicians. When we see somebody that holds a saxophone with their right hand on top, we know that's not going to be happening, or the mouthpiece upside down and things like that. So a very strong effort has been, I think, successfully achieved with the practical side of having these people, these actors, embody not only musicians, but the spirit of the music and how they react and how they breathe the music, the rhythm of the whole thing. I feel tremendous pride, I think, in being part of this and having followed the guidance of Jeff in bringing that to life. And I think it translates perfectly well. The people in New York that have seen the pieces, the musicians that were involved, all reacted very well, saying this feels like it's a guy playing.
Also, Ojeda, John Hawkes commented that this was the most difficult role he's ever played.
Right. Right.
Because it is the furthest distance between who he really is and the character on the screen. And John, you know, there's no room for compromise with his method. There's no room. It has to be, he has to fully embody the character. And to do it in this case was so technically challenging because of also needing to master the music. And I think it's astonishing what John brought to it. That level of commitment and discipline is really like nothing I've ever seen before in my entire life.
Thank you.
Podskalská deník, dobrý den. Padlo tady, že vlastně výchozím momentem k filmu byla hudba, takže předpokládám, že jste sice říkala, že měla být technicky dokonalá v interpretaci herců, nicméně zajímalo mě, jestli jste dávali prostor i pro určitou improvizaci, a stejná otázka se v podstatě týká herecké akce, protože tam jsou natolik komorní dialogy a někdy vypjaté momenty, kde je důležitá ta nálada okamžiku, tak by mě zajímalo, jak moc jste pracovali se scénářem a nakolik herci se ho museli držet a nakolik ten byl prostor právě pro jejich improvizaci na místě. Děkuji.
Yeah, thank you for that. You know, Amy's writing and the screenplay was a collaboration between Topper Lillian, who did the original outline from the memoir, and Amy came and sort of shaped every character and really gave every character language that's so beautiful and specific to the 70s. Another way we try to make the 70s very viscerally real. And the screenplay was so appealing to the actors, and I think this amazing cast, it's a cast that I can't even believe came together. It's so good. There's no explaining it. It's so good, except that Amy's writing is so beautiful, and I think every actor that read her writing wanted to embody those characters. But we did use some improvisation, and what I learned is that improvising is very difficult to keep consistent with the portrait that's being painted so carefully. But it's worth doing long improvisations to just get one or two things that are magic. And there are a couple of scenes there's some even motifs in the film that came out of improvisations. And every actor in the film had a slightly different technique to be an actor. No two actors approached acting in the same way. And which I thought was it was an amazing thing to learn and to witness, because they merge on the screen so perfectly. But when the camera's rolling, they're all inhabiting that same space in a kind of an equal way, but they all came to that actual moment in time through these very different techniques. And some of them, for instance, Caleb Landry Jones, he could, the first take he would throw himself into and make it real, and then every subsequent take he would kind of have to change something so that there was the same sense of risk. And he had some improv. He threw in some little bits of dialogue that were so successful. It's almost hard to imagine the film working had they not been formed in the moment. But the so I think I can justly claim that we well let me just say that using jazz as a model, and if you make a film and jazz is a big part of the subject, and you go to these great lengths to draw parallels to jazz, one of which, by the way, was shooting film, so that it has the kind of organic nature of the body and breath, etc. One of the misconceptions is that you're going to make some film that's kind of quirky and quick and loose. And it's the opposite, really, because the model of jazz is freedom exists, real true flight exists only because of tremendous dedication and discipline and hard work. And so I do think we can say we worked so hard on this movie that we were able to incorporate these kinds of free moments, and they nest into the film in a very natural way.
Děkuji. Další otázka Eva Převřelová.
Hello, from Festival Daily. I'd like to ask more about the cooperation with Amy Jo Albany, because this is very personal topic for her. So how much did she want to be involved, not only with the script writing, but then with the shooting or with the casting, mainly? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Amy was also, she's an executive producer on the film, and she was involved every day. And she was on the set every day, and she was a real touchstone for the actors. And for everyone, for the art department, and we did want this film to be about memory in the sense that we were trying to render Amy's memoir, not a book of history. But we also wanted the nature of the film to draw on her memory. And Amy and I were both about the same age, I guess, and so we're both people that came of age in the 70s, and we didn't want to use any kind of research. We didn't want the film to feel researched of the 70s. We wanted it to be a reconstruction of what we remembered the 70s to be. And I think that when you do the research, you actually are misled. You're drawn to the things that get singled out from the 70s, which is very different from if you could go back in time and see all the things that weren't singled out. And the way that any given room in the 70s was this kind of, had these historical stratas. There's something from the 40s, 50s, 60s there as well, where it's not just a kind of 70s shop. So we really worked hard to make it our recollections. And Amy is a sort of one of the real supreme memorists. She has recall things she can say. Also, it's her. I think it's because her language is so advanced, and her way of speaking is so poetic, that when she translates her memory into something that could be expressed, the words are so poetic, the memory becomes transmitted as something poetic. And when you then do the work to render that so it can be filmed, the result has this kind of intangible quality that comes straight from Amy, from nowhere else.
Hello, I'm Alice Krejčírová. I was just wondering what was real Amy's reaction after watching the whole film?
Mm-hmm. We called her Real Amy. That was her nickname on the set, actually. And then it got shortened to initials, Ra. And then Elle would say, well, I'm fake Amy then, or Fa. And we were always calling for her. Ra, where's Ra? We need Ra on the set right away. You know, I mean, Amy has different, as I think you can imagine, her reaction is complex. And I know she's very proud of the film and loves it and has been to many screenings and we always, you know, and we're very close friends. And she's very happy with it. But I think also for her to be happy with it, also, it's not her life. I mean, that's the other strange thing of film and this question of memoir and film and biography and film, and in this case, autobiography and film. What a challenging idea. And I can't speak for Amy too deeply, but from my view, it seemed that she had to realize at a certain point that it was this other thing, and she started watching it as a movie. I know that there's some characters in it and experiences in it that were very traumatic when they happened the first time, and they stirred trauma writing them. There's a scene, a very important scene with her mother that Amy almost refused to write. And I'm like, it was in the outline, and I said, you know, we have to shoot it. So she said, just give me a legal pad. And I gave her the legal pad. And she scribbled it out on the legal pad in about 2 minutes, and she threw it at me. And it remains in the film word for word. I don't think she ever reread it. And it's the most beautifully written scene. So it's complex, her feeling. I know she would like to be here too, and she had family obligations, and so she couldn't be here. But I really wish that she could be. I'm sure she sends her regards.
Hello, I'm Petra Novotná from the Czech radio. I would like to ask if there was something you and the real Amy couldn't agree on about the 70s.
Sure. Sure. All kinds of, yeah. I mean, we worked together. We worked together on the screenplay for 8 years, and about 4 weeks before going into production, we realized that we couldn't afford the screenplay we had written, and we needed to cut, you know, $1 million of production out of the screenplay, and it was already cast. So the cast had already signed on to document. And so we had to make some condensations that were going to be improvements down the line because we couldn't lose anyone's interest. And I think we did 9 consecutive 12-hour days of rewriting. And in her little bungalow in Burbank, with her kids running around and 3 cats, and the intensity of that closeness. And yes, we would agree and disagree and fight and celebrate, but it was a really incredible collaboration. I mean, it was a journey. It was. I wouldn't want a single second of it to have transpired any differently. But when you ask, I laugh, because when you ask, was there anything that she really disagreed on? It's one single thing comes to mind, and it was really passionate. And it was the coffee table that is in front of the couch in the apartment where she and her dad live. And she looked around the set. We brought her into the set to look at the dressing, and she was like, yeah, okay, I understand. You could only find a dresser like that. It's not exactly the one I had. I mean, she wanted everything to be exact. And she said, but that coffee table, I'm sorry, impossible. No way, I've never seen one like that before. And it was really the simplest little wooden coffee table. And so we sent the art department out scrambling, and the art department they were like, Jeff, we can't find another coffee table that, because it has to be a certain height and a certain thing, and it has to work for all kinds of, and I said, Amy, I'm really sorry. We're going to have to go with that coffee table. And she was like, I understand. And I don't think it's visible in the film, actually.
Kabát Lidové noviny. Já mám 2 otázky na pana režiséra. Jednak, jestli případně někdy měl šanci slyšet Joe Albanyho naživo. A druhá otázka je na ten vztah umění a drog u Joea Albanyho, jestli by bez těch drog byl lepší umělec, anebo jestli naopak by třeba nebyl tak dobrý.
Yeah, well, first I did hear him play. He kind of became like the regular Friday pianist at a club during the 70s. I grew up in New York, and I was a jazz, geek kid in New York. And he was sort of the regular pianist at the West End Cafe. And my brother is a jazz radio disc jockey in New York, and they would do a live broadcast from the West End Cafe. So he became someone, I first knew of him because he had this sort of regular gig there, but he made one record in the 1950s. It's the only thing on record from the 40s all the way to the late 70s when he had kind of a comeback in Europe. And this was a record that I had and loved. And so I did go seek him out, and I saw him play. And when I first met Amy, and the conversation went like this, Amy was listening to the record Chet Baker Sings on a cassette on a broken down boombox while she was working on a film set of mine. And she seemed very unapproachable, and I thought, well, maybe. I filmed a documentary called Let's Get Lost for Bruce Weber about Chet Baker, and I knew Chet Baker fairly well. And I thought, well, maybe if he's a Chet Baker fan, she'll be impressed by that. And I said I knew him, and she was completely unimpressed and actually dismissive, and she told me to, kind of get out of him. What difference does it make? I knew him too, and my dad played with him. And she wouldn't tell me her father's name, and then finally she said Joe Albany, and I said, oh, of course, I know your dad's music. And I saw him on this occasion, and it was the fact that I saw him, I think, that made such a difference for her, that I actually had, not only was I a fan, but I had proximity to him. I think that was very meaningful to Amy in this first meeting when she first sort of decided to open herself up to me. So what a stroke of luck. And I think there's no answer to the question about drugs. I think this is, I've never taken heroin, and I don't know what it is in a way. I think that this myth of heroin and art has hurt a lot of people. It is historically tragic, and there's just I think there's just no way of knowing. I think, in the most optimistic sense, I would hope that, these were artists that did suffer for various reasons, and maybe in all of the mess of it provided some escape, but I don't even want to romanticize it on that level. The other thing I don't want to do is judge it, and I think we were very, very careful in the film to not be judgmental of it, and I think that makes it very different from most films about people who have a drug addiction. And so actually, this is almost one of the things where sometimes I wish that the Q&A at the end of a screening was my asking questions of the audience, because I'm very, it is one thing that I would like to know about, where people end up in that unanswerable sort of position of passing moral judgment, and whether or not sometimes there is value in passing moral judgment if it can be helpful. to someone. And so I think that maybe we make the audience vulnerable to asking these questions of themselves.
Can I interject, Jeff? I just want to say one thing, which is a practical side, not addressing movies with thinning. Drugs doesn't help you becoming a better musician, period. It doesn't. Not at that level. Drug is an impediment to their lives. There's this cliche, which is not, it's...
Maybe I would like to ask a question. We all agree that the movie is very unique in terms of this Los Angeles Hollywood atmosphere, and it probably wasn't cheap to produce it and make it. So what was the story financially behind that movie? Because there is one of the executive producers is Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. I think that's not a usual producer for a movie, for a long feature movie. So what was the history of making it from this sense?
I mean, the budget was $3 million.
Okay.
So there's that on the table.
Yeah.
Not a lot of money for a period film. And for a period film with a main actor who's a minor, who can only be on the set for 8 hours. So we couldn't really work long days because Elle was so necessary. So we just tried to make very clever use of the materials that we had to. And again, I think shooting 16 millimeter brought so much tactile emotion to the period that it allowed us to be very simple. Flea, that was Amy's idea to cast Flea. And Amy and Flea kind of grew up in the same neighborhood, and they ran in the same circles. They didn't really know each other well, but I think Flea had chased after Amy a few times in their youth. And when we had Flea read the script, and he said, "This is a film that furthers the cause of jazz. Jazz is the great American music, and I will do anything to help this film be made." And then he went to meet Amy, and Amy said, "Yes, I saw you perform at this year in the high school gym." And Flea said, "How did you see that? That was the first time our band ever played together, first time, period." She said, "Well, you chased me down at the Mayfair Market, and you told me that I had to come." And then it turned out their lives were totally interlocked. So,
thank you. Is there any other question before we?
I'd like to throw a question at Michael, since he hasn't had to give him a chance. Because I just want to say something about Michael quickly. Is that the film is, when I was a film student, they used to always tell me that filmmaking is in the editing, and I never believed them. It always seemed a very unromantic place to put it. But when shooting was so unbelievably challenging and kind of like a sweat lodge of hallucinating, and then we came and we gave Michael the footage, and then I realized, and so communal, so full of social life, and the film shoot 22 days of just of laughing and hard work, and then we went into the edit, which was 5 months of 7 days a week of us being together in solitude, a complete other reality. One thing seems to have nothing to do with the other, but the film crystallizes, and you realize it was nothing. All we had were fragments. And so, hey, Michael, what was it like editing Lowdown?
Well, thanks. I've never had the opportunity to work with. Jeff and I have worked together for a long time. I've never had the opportunity to work with actors of this caliber, and it was an honor to to work with that film and work with those performances and to honor those performances, and the long, arduous task was really finding the kind of truth in those performances and working with Jeff, who is utterly committed to that endeavor and finding the truth in every scene and in every performance was really the joy of working on this. That and endless hours of listening to music and deciding what historical music would be used in the film was blissful. That and someone asked before about the music and how the music illustrated the period. It wasn't just the music that illustrated the period. There's television and there's radio and old movies and the scores of hours spent listening to music, watching cartoons and horror movies, trying to really come to what these characters would have been watching, listening to, enjoying together, sharing together, was, as I said, blissful. So that's the answer to what cutting Lowdown was like.
Anybody else? So if there's no more questions,
Oh, thank you all
I would
so
like
much.
to thank you very much for coming.
What a pleasure.
We wish your movie the best, not only on this festival, but kind of all over the world. I really would say that we all really liked it here. We saw it at the journalistic screening this morning. So we hope that the audience will like it here as well. And wish you a great stay here. Thank you very much.
It's been such an honor to be here. Really, I love it here, this festival. I'm so happy we're showing it here. And thank you all so much.